5 seconds to submergence. Submergence deep into the absurd.
We have an exciting podcast today. We have a doctor with us today, Dr. Len McCoy. He's a psychologist and a therapist. So how long have you been practicing?
I've been practicing about 21 years, Greg.
21 years. Wow.
Yeah.
So I've been wanting to have a psychologist on the podcast for a long time. I've had one, I believe. I've had Dr. Jamie Derrick. He's a professor at the University of Idaho.
Oh, yeah.
And and she does some private practice as well. And as far as I can see, it appears to be both a stressful and a non-stressful job at the same time. Would you say that is true?
I see her point.
Well, she didn't say that. I'm just like, from my point of view,
you're saying that.
Yeah.
I would say in my practice, I can only speak for myself, that it's far less stressful than stressful. I far more enjoy it, and I don't find it that stressful. To be honest, the only really stressful part generally I have is writing up the notes, working with the clients I really like. So
I guess it's kind of like having a friendship in a sense.
Can you say more about that?
Well, maybe a one-sided friendship, but it's like they're kind of friends with you, but you're kind of, there for them.
Yeah, I probably wouldn't quite put it that way.
Yeah.
I'll just tell you kind of how I explain it to a beginning client who's never been to therapy before. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Is that, and I'm saying this to someone who knows nothing about therapy. They've showed up for the first time. They've sat down, and typically they're a bit nervous. And part of making them feel comfortable is I will say to them, the way therapy works best is, number one, is if we feel like we're comfortable with each other and trust each other enough, but that we're really a team, each of us together as a team, but working on you.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how I would describe it.
A team.
A team working on them. Instead of a typical sort of, I was just going to say, some people, that haven't been to therapy will kind of think that it's more like a typical medical doctor, where, you're going to prescribe something or give assignments, or you're going to be in charge. And I quickly try to help them see that it's really a team effort, even though, of course, I've got my role and job to do with them.
And I think it is a team effort. It's a team effort. I've been to therapy, and it did feel like a team effort. And the past therapists that I've been to, that it didn't feel like a team effort, where they were in charge, or like they were like condescending, or like judgmental, or they like started like suggesting things to me. I was like, it's like, these people are manipulative. Like, I'm out. But then I met this other therapist that really like worked with me, and he like listened to me, and he really kind of just said my words back to me. And then I kind of saw, oh, this is what I'm thinking. This is what's going on with me. This is how it's going.
Good.
And that like made me trust him.
Exactly. And that can take a while to develop. I think it really varies on the person and the therapist. Sometimes trust, initial trust, you just sort of click right from the beginning. And then with some people, I'd say on the other extreme, it may take quite a few sessions, or sometimes they'll let me know, hey, it took me 6 months to really start feeling like I could relax with you.
Yeah.
So it just really varies.
Yeah. And when you do kind of get to that point where you're relaxed with them, the therapists, you're almost excited for the next therapy appointment. Because like at first I was like, oh God, should I go to therapy? I'm not sure if I should. Like, I don't really want to. I don't want to be weird. And then eventually I'm like, yeah, I'm so excited for my next therapy appointment. It's going to be awesome.
It doesn't get much better than that as far as having a client do that and feel that way.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you sent me a quote.
I did.
It was by Henry Nouwen. Is that how it's pronounced?
Correct.
Nouwen.
It is.
Okay.
No.
You can't die to self until you have a self. What in your opinion does that mean to you?
I'll just say this. I grew up in the Christian faith, still involved in that faith. I don't necessarily, I'm not coming on to speak about Christianity per se, but you asked me to pick my favorite quote or the first one that came to my mind. That was it. And I think I picked that because one thing that has so interested me and I've struggled with particularly earlier in my career is, of course, not doing anything to push any sort of religion on the client ever, unless they want to discuss it. But sort of in my own framework of being a Christian and trying to follow Christ's commands is I always in graduate school thought, okay, I don't believe there's any necessary conflict between Christianity and the sciences, including the social sciences. I don't think they have to be dichotomous. And I would read the Bible and see the importance of dying to ourselves to be devoted to other people, to be devoted to God. And then I'd say to myself, this was like in my first year or two of grad school, okay, but how does that work if a person has significant problems? Their self-esteem is so non-existent or so bad. What is there to die to? And I happened to find Henry Nouwen, who's a now deceased priest who wrote a ton of books and was really psychologically minded. And I read that and it just struck me, there it is. There's the connection between psychology and not just Christianity, but dying to oneself for other people, of putting other people first at times, but also not neglecting ourselves. And so when he wrote that, I'm like, you can't die if there's nothing to die to. If you have an incomplete enough self that you are just hanging on, or you just, I guess in the extreme, someone who's got severe dissociation, used to be called multiple personalities, how are they going to die to themselves to fully be available to others? No, they can't. They have to develop that self. Then they can choose what to do with how they relate to faith, other people. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So I just wanted to clarify something. So when you say die to something, are you saying that you're giving up your life for something else or someone else, for a cause?
It could go to that point, but I'm really talking more about the frame of one's heart and mind of at times putting others first ahead of yourself.
So being selfless.
Exactly. It's being selfless. But what he's saying in your terms is we can't be selfless if we don't have a self.
Yeah, exactly. We can't die unless we're alive.
Exactly. But no, I'm really not talking about literal death. It could go that far, but that's not really what I'm addressing.
Yes, I know. You're saying like we can't be selfless if we don't have a self. Like if we're not if we already don't have a self, then we can't really be selfless. I mean, you can't really call someone who like basically like doesn't have a selfless, because it's not like they are trying to be selfless. They already are. Like they don't really have a self, so it's not like they can like will themselves into selflessness willingly.
And when people try to do that, I mean, their intentions generally are well, and certainly see this outside of the Christian faith, but I've seen it a lot growing up in the faith, is people wanting to put others first, but they're so damaged or incomplete or immature that that's impossible and frustrating for them to do.
And in a sense, do you think some of these people who are trying to be selfless, but they don't have a self, they are almost being enslaved by a thought, like a compulsion to be good, to be selfless, like they feel like they have to be selfless. And
exactly.
And because of that, they're forced into it instead of willingly wanting to be selfless.
You mean forced by others or forced by their own sense of obligation?
Forced by their own sense of obligation.
Yes. Yeah, I would agree.
Do you think people can be forced by others to do things, or do you think this is, obviously we're just being speculative here, but do you think other people can force you to do other things, or do you think people can try to force you to do other things, and then it's yourself which then takes the reins to control you one way or the other?
Are you talking about this concept of selflessness, or in general?
In general, can a person be controlled by other people, or can they only be controlled by their own ideals and ideas and feelings and sensations?
These are very hard questions for late in the day, Greg. And it's a great question. Would you mind repeating it again?
So if someone comes up to me and they command me, Greg, wash your dishes, and then I say, okay, I will wash my dishes, and then I go and I wash my dishes, am I doing that because they told me, or am I doing that because what they told me sparked a certain sensation with my mind, and then these sensations and emotions that were sparked in my mind by their command then initiated the true control over my actions and my deeds to go and wash the dishes?
Wow, great question. And I've never thought that intricately about a request or a command. So that's fantastic. I think my first thought is choice is still there. I mean, unless they're actually pushing us and forcing us to wash those dishes, we may not think we have a choice, but we are choosing to follow what they're saying. Yes, so yes, I do think there is a choice there. We may think, well, like if that's the children, right, of parents, and the parents are in control, and the kids want to please them, okay, right? You could say they're doing what their parents told them to do. But don't plenty of children not do what their parents tell them to do?
Yes, they certainly do. So, yeah, and so when you're practicing therapy with a client, do you stress that they always have a choice?
Without question. Without question. In fact, before they ever enter my office and have an initial phone visit, to see what's going on, what they're looking for help with, discuss that. And then, if it progresses to they set up a first visit, excuse me, just lost my train of thought there. Even on the phone before they show up, I lay this concept out to them that this is a look-see, that they're telling me a bit, they're coming to see me. I tell them a little bit if they want to know on the phone of kind of my style of practice, my training, any other thoughts I might have, but it's usually fairly brief. But I always tell them that there is, at the end of the first session, we'll probably know whether we'd be a good enough match to work together. And I usually say to them whether we'll be a good or a good enough match, because the match is incredibly important in building trust and that sort of thing. But I also tell them this is an initial intake where each of us have a chance to ask the other one questions, and neither of us is obligated to continue after that first session. So that's the very first thing I start out is, let's get together and see what we both think about becoming a team or not.
Yes. And at the end of the day, they're in charge of their own life.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
I would say that, excuse me, go ahead.
yeah, and being in charge of their own life, that implies that they have a self, or at least they believe that they have a self.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the only time I think that would not apply would be with someone who is psychotic or in some other way severely disordered or mentally disabled, because even if they are lacking a sort of a cohesive self, as long as their mind is capable and they have enough capacity, I want to honor that, right? That they have that ability still, which is no. You can choose to come. You can choose to say, no, I don't think you're the right therapist for me. Could you point me in another direction, Dr. McCoy?
So you've been practicing for 21 years. And before that, you were in school, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay. So I sent you one of these questions earlier in the email I sent you. And it's, so what is the line between a mental illness / disorder and an abnormal personality, or an irregular or an unstable emotional patterns? So like, what's the difference between a personality disorder or mental illness or mental disorder and just like your everyday typical emotions, or like a mood swing, or just an ecstatic personality? What's the line?
Yeah, it's a good question too. You're kind of clarifying it because you kind of corrected yourself there by putting personality disorders in with mental health. Mm-hmm. But so I want to make sure I'm understanding, what's the line between an actual mental disorder and a problem? Is that a simple way of putting it? Or,
yes, that's a very nice way of putting it. Okay,
great. My first thought is the severity and the types of problems. The American Psychiatric Association publishes what I call the Bible, which is the DSM-5, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. All mental health people use the psychiatrist's book there because it's the standard diagnostic. So if, and I know I'm being a little theoretical here, but if any of the criteria for a mental health disorder in that book are clearly met, then a person does have a mental health diagnosis. Now, that's going to vary from the mildest mental health diagnosis to the most severe. But I would say just theoretically, that would be the dividing line is, does it meet the criteria for a diagnosis? Okay. That said, I forget which justice it was years ago on the U.S. Supreme Court who, I don't know if this is a good analogy, is they were discussing a case about pornography. Justice said his criteria for what was pornography versus what was purely erotic or something else was, you know it when you see it. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, no, yeah, I've heard of that.
And I guess I'm trying to balance, from the extreme technical side of it meets the criteria for a specific diagnosis and or when you see it.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that, especially, I mean, you can kind of just look at someone and you can like spend 5 minutes with them and you just know that there is just not something like the sparks are not like meeting the light bulb here.
I agree with you in part. So, and I'm sure you're not saying that's for everybody. I
Yeah,
agree
not
with
for
you in
everybody.
part, definitely. But I think that people in 5 minutes, you would have not necessarily any clue that they have a mental health problem, but you spend some time, particularly the more you get to know each other, and particularly close friends or romantic partners, then, all sorts of things start becoming apparent.
Yes. Yeah, the
kind of common sense in a way,
yeah, I mean, as you stare at the grass like beneath your feet longer and longer, you start to notice all the dirt and the rocks.
Exactly.
All that.
Exactly. Yeah. And then I agree with you. At times you can, not just for a psychotherapist, but an intuitive person or just an observant person, you can look at someone and go, wow, they're really troubled. They have some real, you can just tell they're troubled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how does depression manifest within an individual for someone who is troubled, or not just depression, but anxiety and PTSD? How have you seen these things manifested in people? Like in other ways outside the normal. Like, like people are depressed and they're like, often we think of someone who's all mopey and they're sad
Right.
and they're sitting on the couch and they don't do anything. But have you seen other manifestations of depression that are different than just sitting on the couch and doing nothing and like having thoughts of suicide?
Absolutely. And I don't have long enough on here to think through all the possibilities. By the way, it's a great question. I'll tell you the first thought I have there is insert, and I'm being stereotypical here a bit, but that particularly in men who were raised to be strong, not cry, not be sad, that plenty of men, as we know, get as depressed as women. Oftentimes it comes out as anger. And so with some men, it's like you have no idea there's any depression there at all. You just think, wow, that man is a loose cannon, or wow, he's really angry a lot. And then if you get to know him as a person, but particularly in therapy, and it can take some time, he may come in because he's angry all the time. And then you start looking around and it's one of the values, particularly of the first couple sessions, where I usually ask a lot of questions like any therapist would to get background on their childhood and stuff. And you start seeing and wondering, oh, this man has had a few losses in his life. Oh, he started drinking at this point. Oh, might he be depressed and not just angry? And of course, sometimes he's just angry, and other times the anger is secondary to the depression, meaning it's an unconscious cover for the ultimate problem. There is not anger. But the root is sadness, depression, or loss. But he's been trained, like many men have been trained, and women too, that the appropriate way to demonstrate problems, the acceptable way for man, is to show anger.
Yeah. And pretend that the problem doesn't exist.
Or that the problem is out there, it's not within him.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So in a sense, they have like this poison inside of them. And then instead of trying to treat the poison that's within them, they go out and they declare, that's the poison, that's the poison, that's the poison. I want to destroy all that poison. And then maybe that'll help me.
Yeah. Or when you say, can you say what you mean by destroying the poison?
Yeah, like with anger, like you think that you can be angry at other people and all these other things that are supposedly poisoning you. And by doing that, that will cure you of your feelings of depression. That'll save you, we'll say.
By doing what again with the anger?
By being angry. Just by being angry, just like finding targets to be angry at and blaming all of your problems on other people and other things that are going on outside of the self. You can destroy.
I do.
Harmony.
Yeah, absolutely. Though I'm not sure the person thinks it's going to solve anything. They might. It's not going to, because it's not getting to the root.
Yeah.
But it's at least a way to discharge the energy. Mm-hmm. Freud talked a lot about energy, and certainly some of his ideas have been disproved, but the longer I practiced, the more brilliant I think Freud was in some key areas. And he talked a lot about energy and us being a closed system. Mm-hmm. And if enough stuff builds up, it's got to go somewhere. Yeah. Right. So I guess I would see it at times the angry man might be trying to solve something. At times he's just simply got to discharge energy. Mm-hmm. And ultimately that energy, if you will, comes from the depression. Yeah. He's unable or unwilling to recognize what's going on in me. He lacks the insight perhaps. Mm-hmm. And so he's angry, but one of the wonderful things, hopefully, that can happen in therapy is developing insight. And it might be something as simple as this, like if I was working with a person, certainly could be with women as well. I don't want to say this is just a male problem, is after you've established rapport, is at some point saying, are you sad? They might be very angry, and I might just say, how often are you ever sad? And they will either say, I don't know what you're talking about. I'm angry. But more often than not, if you're a good clinician and you time it right, they'll stop and say something like, yeah, I am. I'm sad. And then I would ask, what are you sad about? And then all sorts of things might tumble out.
Yeah, you mentioned that, like Freud, a lot of his things have been disproven or whatever. But I mean, when we're dealing with the human mind, and we're dealing with emotions, and we're dealing with other people who have a whole internal universe of thoughts and imaginations and memories and ideas and loves and passions and sadness and just all these things. You can't really quantify all of that. You can't really put it all on a piece of paper and record it and go do research about everything and understand it. Because at the end of the day, we have this built-in system called empathy, and we have our intuition. And I think when you're going out there and you're practicing psychology, are you kind of in tune with that? Are you in tune with the idea that at the end of the day, the books are kind of over here, but it's me and him or her, and I can see them and I can feel what's going on, and I have this sort of intuition about them, and I have the ability to ask them these questions, but not quantify everything.
Absolutely. You certainly need to have good training, kind of like in any endeavor. If you have good training, then you can develop the art of it.
Yeah.
Where you know the rules, some of the foundations, and then you can develop the art. Did you ever see A River Runs Through It, Greg, the movie?
No, I haven't.
Have you heard of it ever?
Is that the fly fishing movie in Montana?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Exactly. I don't remember when that came out. It doesn't matter. But I remember, and I know nothing about fishing, but I love the movie for a variety of reasons. And I just remember when Brad Pitt, who played the younger sort of rambunctious brother there, and there was a great scene where his older brother and his father were standing on the banks of this beautiful river in the Northwest somewhere. And Brad Pitt's character was the younger brother, always sort of behind them. You know, I don't know that they looked down, but he was the typical baby of the family. And he was off down the stream casting, and the photography is just brilliant. I can see it in my mind. He's casting back and forth. The sun is reflected off of the line, and it's just this graceful back and forth. And then he slings it out, and his father and his brother are just watching. And I can't remember what they said, but basically they saw he got his own rhythm.
Yeah.
And not he had broken free. Mm. He had broken free and found his own style, and it was gorgeous. And they couldn't imitate it because it was him. It's a fantastic scene, just the beauty of it, just seeing that this kid finally finds his way. And finally, he learned the rules, but finally, he made him his own. Mm-hmm. He made him his own.
Yeah, so that reminds me of, so I was in this differential equations class. And the professor, he would talk about math. He would say, math is like cooking. First, you have the recipe, and I'll give you all the recipe. But eventually, as you do it more and more and you work with the recipe, maybe you'll add some other stuff in. Maybe you'll take some things out. Maybe you'll stir it a little bit different. Maybe you'll cook it a little bit hotter. Maybe you'll just trash the recipe. You'll get your own ingredients. But at the end of the day, it's either going to taste good or it's not. And that's up to you.
Same way in a lot of things in life, isn't it? And I would say in therapy as well.
Yeah. Yes, go ahead.
No. Please go ahead.
Yeah, but the thing is, something's going to taste good to some people. Something's going to taste real bad to other people. So it's both like, you know, when you're talking about the father and the older brother looking at Brad Pitt or whatever, doing his own rhythm, it looks beautiful. And it works for him, but it might not work for everyone else, right? But he's using the recipe.
Absolutely. There's no way the other two would have been able to even duplicate it. And if they had tried, it would have been ridiculous because they had their own casting styles. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And you have your own therapy style, your own art of doing things.
Yeah, it's been very interesting. Well, I think it's like this in life too, is so much in life, particularly if we, develop in a career or a hobby or something, there's the skill development and then there's the art. And I think people just by nature, some people are much more concrete. Thank goodness they're more concrete than I am in their jobs because I couldn't do their jobs. And some of the rest of us are more artists, and neither is better.
Yeah.
But I'd say I'm more an intuitive therapist. I've had great training, but I remember I was meeting with a colleague of mine several years ago who did therapy, but he did a lot of teaching. And we were talking, and he was talking about the kind of research he was doing and therapy. And he was very, very bright. And I could tell he was a great teacher. And he talked a lot. And then finally he turned to me and he said, can you tell me, I've been trained. I won't go into this. There's lots of different types of therapy and different, we call them orientations, theoretical orientations. And I told him what I had been trained in, and he asked me to explain it to him. And I hemmed and hawed, said a few sentences and said, I really can't do that. And he was kind of smiled because he was a teacher and he was very teaching minded. I'm not a teacher. I teach in therapy, but I don't. And it was a bit embarrassing. And then I just brushed it off because he said, well, that's it? That you don't have any more to say? And I said, I simply let it go and I said, I'm an intuitive therapist. I don't really think he got it. I just let it go because it's what works for me, but I couldn't break it apart for him. It'd be like breaking apart a painting. Well, you could do it, but and I'm not saying I'm any better by any means than people who could explain exactly what they're doing. It's just a different approach. But like, I love your recipe analogy. Does it work or not? Does the client get better or not? If they get better, who cares how it occurred? Who cares? Mm-hmm. Did they get better? Is the cake good or not?
Yeah.
Do we care then? Do we care how the cake was made if it's delicious or if it's horrible?
No, we don't. We don't. Well, unless we want to attempt to replicate it, right?
Exactly. And then we're going to get into more learning and teaching, right? Yeah. I also don't want to, I don't think I have, but I don't want to imply, like in something like psychology, that art is all there is. No, you have to learn it. You have to learn the basics.
Well, that comes with everything.
Exactly. And that's why I kind of like the Brad Pitt analogy. Is he and his dad was quite this stern Presbyterian minister, and the boys were always like, oh, and his dad was like drilling him on everything. And then so he learned it. And then he got to have joy. That was something you mentioned in some of the questions. I don't know if we're going to get to happiness or joy. That's up to you. But you could tell then he went from knowing how to cast to experiencing joy and freedom in casting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, joy and freedom in casting. Because because when you're developing a skill and you want to develop the skill, at first it's kind of shifty, like you have to think about what's going on. Then eventually you kind of just get into your own flow of things.
Exactly.
So with happiness, I did want to get into that. So, and I think it was either the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. I'm pretty sure it's Declaration of Independence. It said that we have the right to a pursuit of happiness. It was an unalienable right of us as citizens. So should people also have a right to pursue sadness, to pursue anger, to pursue like all these emotions, stress, anxiety? Like, do you think all emotions are just as good as happiness? Or do you think happiness should always be like the highest ideal? Should someone be happy all the time?
Well, if they are, there's something wrong with them, because nobody is. Nobody's happy all the time. It doesn't exist. Can you narrow that at all, the question?
Like, is it healthy to feel sadness, to feel anger, to feel emotions other than happiness?
Without question. Absolutely. Unless it's not. Unless it's excessive or something is being avoided with that emotion. Kind of like I talked about, anger can be a cover for depression. Other emotions can be a cover. Anger could be a cover for fear, right? Fear could be a cover for depression. All sorts of, I think that's one really important thing as a psychologist, is seeing the way emotions can be used in a healthy way and not. There's no unhealthy emotion in my mind. It's simply, how is it being used? Is it being used in a healthy manner or not? Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. So with that being said, do you think that to be a person who isn't mentally ill, that is stable, that's secure, that feels good about their life, generally speaking, do you think they need essentially a balance of their emotions?
Overall, I would agree. It's going to vary with the person of what that balance is, but no, I tend to agree with you there.
So what do you mean by it kind of depends on the person where
there?
that balance is?
Well, just sort of innate personality traits that we all have that are different. A balance is going to be different in some people between sadness, fear, joy, anger, than some other people. I think there's a bit of a different balance. In the aggregate, I would say, well, I don't want to get into statistics. That's going to lead to disappointment since I'm not good in statistics.
That's right.
But I think overall, I agree with you. I think a balance is going to be the healthiest approach. I think that balance will look a little different in different people.
Okay. So just kind of like how Brad Pitt fly fishing, he's going to fly fish a lot differently than how I would fly fish.
Exactly. But if you both enjoy it on a emotional level, that's the same. And if you both catch a fish, that's the same.
Yeah. But one of us might be going back into the brush and getting our hook caught on. I won't say which one that's going to be. But with that said, that's me being like unstable emotionally, like using this analogy,
right.
with the outside world, right? Like I'm unstable and I'm hooking my pole onto stuff. I'm getting caught onto stuff. I'm getting held back.
Exactly. And what if you're hurting somebody? You're not just held back, but you, to use your analogy, it's not in the brush, it's on another person. You've hooked another person.
Yeah.
And they're going, ow. Right? Yeah. There's a problem.
So in America right now, there are thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people that are with their unstable emotions and their hurt poisoned bodies or poisoned minds, I guess. They are like continuously hurting other people. And do you think, in a sense, emotional disorders or mental disorders, do you think they can be contagious?
Oh, it's an interesting question.
Not contagious in a traditional sense, but
right. How do you mean it in affecting others? Can you elaborate on that?
Like, if I were to be depressed and I'd be sitting on the couch all day, could I cause a mental disorder to someone else who's affected by my terrible condition?
You certainly could impact them. I wouldn't go so far as to think it would cause something.
Because I was just thinking that there have been times in human history where like masses of people have been manipulated to do terrible things. Like almost go full-blown psychotic when they're in the herd and there's like a loss of they get kind of caught into these waves. Like they get kind of like there's a bunch of people, I guess we'll go back to fly fishing, that are all hooking their stuff on like the branches and each other and whatnot. So while you're fly fishing, you get distracted and then you start doing that same thing, right? So do you think?
Well, I certainly think that's, excuse me, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, do you think that in a sense, when we see other people in a bad spot, that can kind of corrupt our own mental health?
Oh, absolutely. It's just a matter of to what degree. You know what I did think about, and where I thought you might be going with that, is sort of the other extreme is a cult.
Yeah.
I mean, that's sort of the epitome, right, of how people are affecting each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, obviously, we tend to be so. There's a great book that it was one of my first grad school books called The Social Animal. And I just like the title.
Yeah.
But we are social animals, and most of us want others to approve of us,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so we tend to go along if we think it's going to help us. So in a cult, I mean, absolutely, people are significantly being affected. But in that analogy, it breaks down too, because again, we have a single person at the top, the cult leader.
Yeah. But they are like enforced, like they're spreading ideas, like because they're psychotic, and then they're like kind of using their psychotic, like ecstatic personality to affect other people, especially lonely people that don't feel like they belong.
By psychotic, are you simply meaning some sort of break with reality? Not
Yeah.
necessarily hallucinating or hearing things.
Yes. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you. There's and I think that's a good definition of psychosis. It can be very mild to very severe. And the mild is simply having some sort of break with reality, including in a cult, all sorts of break with reality, like the leader only wants the best for us. And we're here just to help each other. And the Kool-Aid's going to be fine. Referring back to you're much younger than I am. Have you heard of Jonestown back in the 70s?
Yes, I have.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of a classic study, right? Is go ahead, the Kool-Aid's fine. Go ahead and drink it. And then I still remember I was in college and remember seeing the Time magazine that was just sickening of all of those people in Jonestown dead, just laying all over the ground, having literally drank the Kool-Aid.
Wow. Yeah, it's crazy how one person can kind of create almost a super organism.
Well put.
Yeah, like they can be the brain, and then like everyone's the cell, and then they drink the Kool-Aid, the whole body's dead.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I don't know this for sure, but I'm assuming that's where the phrase drinking the Kool-Aid came from. I mean, it's been used for decades now. Oh, they're drinking the Kool-Aid, right? These people literally drank the Kool-Aid. Yeah. It was so sad.
So before we go, I had one more question I wanted to ask you. So it kind of circles back to kind of everything that we've discussed, but especially that quote that we opened with: "You can't die to self until you have a self." So what is the self, at least in your opinion? What is having a self? What is it?
Oh, after you sent me those questions, like ahead of time, I've thought about that. And how does one really answer that? Yeah. I'll do my best, but it's so incredibly difficult.
You can answer it by not answering it too.
I'll at least make some sort of attempt here. What is the self? It's who we are, and it's a sense that we're boundaried, yet free, that we have some degree of awareness of who we are, what we feel, what we want, what we dream, that we move along. And even if it's a person who can't walk but's disabled, they have no physical ability to move, but that doesn't mean they don't have a self. What else might I say? Do you have any other thoughts there? Because it's such an incredibly difficult thing to answer.
Well, I'm not sure if there's a self or not, but I know
Okay.
that there is someone inside of me who I call myself,
Okay.
who declares that I have a self. And having that belief, having that idea that I have a self, having that feeling, especially the feeling of having autonomy over myself, having the feeling that I am something that does things because I do that, right? That in and of itself is, I'll just call it like a miracle. It's awesome. It's great. And it's great having a self that can go and communicate to other selves, which is what you do in therapy to help them be themselves.
Very well put. We could talk a long time on this. I think one thing I just like to throw in quickly, because I know we're running out of time, is the relationships inside the self. We deal with that in psychology all the time, whether we're literally thinking about it or not. Is we talk a lot in psychology and think a lot amongst ourselves, at least, about integration and disintegration. And a healthy self has a high degree of integration, meaning there's different parts, there's different aspects of us, and yet there's a degree of harmoniousness of it working together well enough to say, this is who I am. This is who I am. This is who I am in the world. Doesn't mean we don't have all sorts of problems, questions, all sorts of emotions, but there's a cohesion. And I think integration is a great word for it, is a sense of there's pieces, but they are in a certain degree of harmony enough that we can function adequately, and vice versa. That I would just again quickly refer to a person used to be called multiple personality disorder, now called dissociative identity disorder. That's about as disintegrated as you can get without going into full-blown psychosis. And that is not, in some ways, I might be going too far. In a way, I would say that is not a self. Those are fragmented selves that have never come together or have been torn apart. That self, yes, they have the name. My name is John or Jessica, but even the name is at times foreign to them because there's names of these other parts of that are part of them unintegrated. I probably went on too long there. I'm sorry.
No. So what you're saying here is that the self is kind of a huge like combobulation of multiple cells, and perhaps they're fluid, perhaps they're separated, but to be a self is to have something within you that is well integrated and that you can refer to as me.
Exactly. Very well put.
Perfect. Well, thank you for coming on.
It's my pleasure. It's been great.
Yeah, that was awesome. I was hoping to get someone who is just a private practitioner of therapy, of counseling, and you were just the guy.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
So with all that said, folks, you gotta build yourself up before you can break it down, and I guess vice versa sometimes. But anyways, thank you for listening.